Live from Las Vegas, the entertainment capital of the world, it's the Joe Cortez Show.
Well, welcome once again to the Joe Cortez Show here in Las Vegas, Nevada, the boxing capital of the world, and of course, the entertainment capital of the world. And today we have a special guest by the name of Dr. Albert Capanna, a dear friend of mine. We go back about 28 years when I first got to Las Vegas. And Dr. Capanna has been the ringside physician at most of the major fights for the last, since I believe 1983. And so I say that Dr. Albert Capanna is an expert on boxing, not only as a neurologist, but inside the ring when it came to health and these safety concerns and to watch out for fighters. I would look at him. If I was in that ring, a big fight going on, and I needed assistance from a ringside doctor, I know if I looked, I made eye contact with Dr. Albert Capanna, he automatically would come into the ring. Sometimes he would come into the ring on his own because he felt he was needed to make sure that the fighters were not going into any unnecessary punishment. Sometimes, and most times when the doctor tells the referee, I would say 99%, I say 100% of the time, no referee has ever said no to him when he says, I recommend you stop this fight. We, the referee, will have the last call on calling a fight, but always when Dr. Capanna was working that fight with me that night, I know I was in good hands because I had somebody who was going to take over and make the right decision. Welcome, Dr. Albert Capanna.
Thank you. Nice to be with you. Pleasure, sir.
Nice to have you on the show here again.
Thank you. All right.
Dr. Capanna, the fans out there know that boxing is not a sport of easy sport. It's a difficult sport. It's a hard sport because it's the hurt game. And you as a doctor, you're there to make sure that fighters don't take unnecessary punishment. But sometimes a fighter is in a battle and where he's really hurt, and but not ready to go 100%. But sometimes you say, ref, I think it's time to go. Can you walk us through the process as you as a ringside doctor that you would tell the referee what to do and what not to do? What's the process?
Basically, we always care about the fighter first, and we don't want them to get hurt. That's the only reason we're there, is to protect the fighter. So it depends on how they're doing. If they're doing good, then obviously you don't have to worry about them. If they're having problems, the question is how much of a problem are they having? And there's two things. You want them not to be hurt. That's your job, to protect them. And you want them to be fair to them as well. And so the more experience you have, usually the better you are at knowing when to talk with the referee, talk to the corner, and ask them how they're feeling, et cetera, and examine them to know if they're going to be hurt by going on, because obviously you don't want to hurt them. You don't play boxing, you fight, okay? It's not a game playing thing. And the objective is to hurt someone. And for many, many years, I was always criticized because people want to ban boxing, and I've been an advocate from the beginning. One, I like the sport, obviously, but the bottom line is, if you ban it, it'll just go in back streets, offshore, wherever, and they'll still do it. We've done it for thousands of years. And now, recently, I've been giving lectures on what to do as a ring physician and how to, in sports, how to help the athletes and make it safer. So we're turned the corner a little bit, at least, that people understand, there is a line where you don't want somebody to get hurt. And that's the point of it all.
Yeah, now, we know that you've been involved with some surgeries of fighters that have gotten hurt. I remember one of my fighters, Robert Wangila,
yes.
I believe in 1994, if I'm not mistaken, and you were the ringside doctor. And I remember stopping that fight. It was a back-and-forth fight, and both fighters were taking punches, but nothing seriously until the last round where Wangila got hit with an uppercut, got a little hurt. He got pushed down, not punched down, but he got pushed down. And I said, no knockdown. But when he got up, I got close to the action. I know he was a little bit wobbly. So I got in. He took 1-2 punches, and I jumped in. I stopped it. And everybody, was like, wow, Joe, why you said they were booing me because I stopped the fight. But then you examined the fight in the ring, and he seemed to be okay at the moment when you saw, the post of physical. Just immediate check there in the ring. And he seemed okay. He walked out. Then about 15 minutes later, they come running out of the room that he was having seizures. And then you were there, and then they rushed him to the hospital. I remember I went home, And I took a shower. I got dressed. I went back to UMC Hospital. And when you came out of the surgery room, I was there waiting. You came out that door. I could picture you like if it was yesterday. You opened the door. You came out. I was standing right there. And I started looking in your face. And you looked at me. You said, Joe, he doesn't look good. Doesn't look good at all. And then that was the sign that 2 days later he passed. And that was a sad moment in boxing because I thought I did the right call. Everybody thought, he kind of stopped a little too soon, not knowing that I was the closest to the action. And then shortly thereafter, what happened was sad, but you've performed surgery on about, how many fighters?
3 of them, I believe, professional ones, yes. Yeah, so basically, like with Robert, when we did his surgery, I knew that he had a lot of swelling in his brain, or cerebral edema, we call it. And so the prognosis was worse than if he just had a blood clot. But that's the usual case with athletes because they've got a lot of contusions to the brain as well as the blood there. We had another fighter at Caesar's Palace that went down like that, and I actually intubated him, put a tube in the ambulance right there. We had his head open in 30 minutes from the time we left the ring, and he got better for a couple of days, and then he passed a few days after that. So you probably can't do it any faster, do a craniotomy than a half hour from the ring to the blood clots out. So there is a limit. So that's why it's so important that people working in these sports understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to protect the athletes or the fighters in our case. And at the same time, be fair to them, meaning they're athletes, they've worked hard, they want to compete. And so it's a balancing act, but we always try to balance on the side of, just like Mr. Cortez, of saving the fighter, not hurting them.
Yeah, and now how do you see boxing today as far as safety is concerned, is working with the referee, the seminars? What's the latest with the program with referees and your instructions, seminars? How's it changed prior to previous years?
Yeah, basically, the Nevada Athletic Commission now, after a fight, even if it's very late, we go over the fights and see the scoring of the judges, the referees, what they did. We talk about everything to try and get better. I've done fights in other states, and they basically are not as organized as ours is. They don't have as many fights, so it's logical that they wouldn't be. But we're having a seminar, the Athletic Commission and Nevada State Athletic Commission is having one, I believe it's September 6th, and I got the date right, specifically to go over training with referees. And that's a controlled thing in the gym. And basically you don't have to, worry about, having problems with, anybody there, because you can talk about anything, you can say anything. And we're fairly open, meaning if you say something that sounds silly, we don't care, because the objective is to learn. And if you learn from it, that's fine. That's okay with us. But the idea is to become better and better and better. And obviously, if you're in a state where they don't do many fights, it's harder to get the experience. But the objective's the same. And we always invite people from other states to come here, and we're happy to work with them as well to help the fighters.
Yes, I know that. As far as boxing is concerned, that the safety, the seminars that referees have with doctors, is very informative to us as referees, because we learned a lot from you telling us what signs to look for when a fighter's in a concussive episode. Right. He gets knocked down. He got a bad laceration from a headbutt or a punch. And these are the kind of things that only the doctors can tell us, when it's best to stop the contest. Let's say, for example, if the cut is in the eyelid as to when it's up on the outside here, how do you inform your referees what to do when it's in the eyelid here, right in the where it's really dangerous as to up here?
Yeah, it's much more significant if it's in the eye. On the one hand, we want to let the fighter go on if he can. If it gets too deep where it might hurt the nerves in the eye or the little muscles in the eye that attach to the bones there, then we tell him they've got to stop it, because he might end up not able to use his eye or have double vision or be blind the rest of his life. I actually give a lecture now called Neurosurgeon to the Gladiators about sports. I gave it in Puerto Rico, in fact. And people want to learn now. Before there was like, get out of here, you're crazy, doing this stuff. But now people want to understand that. But the for example, that Mr. Cortez just gave of the cut, it's very important. Sometimes we let them go on and they get deep, and they get deeper and deeper. Then we say, now we got to stop because it's too risky. So we try to give the athlete the benefit of the doubt, meaning let them go on as much as possible. But when we reach the point we think it's likely to hurt him, then that's when we tell the referee that we should stop it.
Exactly. I've been in so many fights where the fighters have been in those conditions where I have to look. Sometimes I never even call in the doctor. The cut got so bad, but because of the instructions from the doctor, like he would tell us, Joe, if it gets any worse, just stop it. And it comes to that point sometimes where the fighter's taking a lot of punches, and I had to just, not even going back to the doctor, just wave it off right there. The instructor commission had to stop it. The blood, it was just too bad. He was going blind. I remember refereeing the Julio Cesar Chavez and Oscar De La Hoya fight, where Oscar De La Hoya was the first round hit Chavez with a jab and cut his eye open in the first round, and the blood was just so bad and the cut kept getting worse. I kept calling in Dr. Flip Omansky about 3 or 4 times, and when I called him in the last time, I told Dr. Omansky, I think this is getting worse, and he told me, Joe, I said, stop it. And it was pretty bad. I mean, I didn't want to see Oscar try to take unnecessary punishment because he was blinded. He was blinded by the blood. He couldn't see. And he was just taking punches one after the other. I said, let me call time, bring him over to the doctor, check him out. He said, that's it. We stopped it. And that was the passing up the torch from De La Hoya, for Chavez to De La Hoya. Right. But that was back in 1995, I believe it was, or could have been 96. But it was one of the highlights of my career because of it was such a major fight, and without the doctors there at ringside, sometimes it makes it difficult for us of when to stop it, even though it's a high-profile fight. But I know that safety comes first, and we have to make sure that the fighter gets taken out of there on time before he gets hurt seriously. Now, what procedures do you have now in place when it comes to pre-fight physicals and post-fight physicals?
Basically, the pre-fight physical, we're supposed to be doing everything on them, meaning checking their heart, their lungs, their hands, everything, their ribs, looking at their skin. They don't have some infection that might, be a problem. So we do a pretty extensive physical, and we obviously check their neurological system, and those are a series of tests we do, and check their balance, their coordination, etc. If something's wrong, then we may do more tests at the same time. But the idea is the pre-op physical, or the pre-fight physical rather, is to make sure that there's not something obviously wrong to begin with. I've been in the fight rings at Hearns's, et cetera, in Detroit. I trained in Detroit. So basically, some of those fighters wouldn't care if their arm was falling off. You let them fight, they'd fight. So you had to be reasonable. But most of the fighters, if you figure out something's wrong with them and tell them, if they don't know it already, most of them do, they'll go along with you. And as long as you tell them what could happen to them, et cetera. And I think it's just a matter of informing them, like, this could happen to you. I know you want to fight. I know you've gotten here, especially if they're fighting in Vegas, like for the first time, or that kind of stuff. So the pre-op or pre-fight physical is to make sure they're okay, because even though they've had physicals, they've gotten licensed, et cetera, something can happen in training coming up to it. And I always ask them, when did you spar last? Because that's when they usually do it pretty hard, and they'll tell you a day or two ago or last week or whatever. So basically, we're trying to protect them, and it's not fair to the other fighter, or the fans for that matter, to come out and the guy goes out there and he's wiped out immediately in the first round because he's got some problem. So it's our job to find out if there is a problem.
Now, you're talking about problem. There was a fighter here in Las Vegas named Oliver McCall.
Yes.
He was fighting, and they had some issues with him. When he was fighting, all of a sudden he broke down. What happened in that fight? You were there. You were the ringside doctor.
Yeah, myself and another ringside doctor were sitting there. The other doctor said, "What's going on?" I said, "He's having a psychological break." He said, "What?" I said, "Yes, he is." And I've seen it a couple times.
He started crying.
Amateurs. Yeah, he started crying. He was walking in the corner. He put his arms down. He didn't want to fight. And basically, it was similar to some people who have a psychological breakdown from something else. But in his case, it was the stress of the fight, and he was a good fighter, and it was expected to to be a really good fight, but they had to stop it but we checked them physician-wise. There's nothing to check as far as physical went, but mentally, obviously, he was having a major problem.
Yeah.
And you don't see that very often. I've done I don't know how many fights, and I can only think of one other amateur that I saw that with when I did the USA boxing and that stuff.
Yeah, but you know what? Something happened 2 nights ago, Friday night.
Yes. Oh my
As a
gosh.
fighter, comes into the ring, referee Celestino Ruiz from Chicago, giving the instructions, and everything was okay. I mean, this guy, Curtis Harper, he was coming there like tough guy, and he climbed over the top rope. He didn't go through. He climbed over the rope, and the referee said, "Wow, they're going to be a good fight. This guy's tough."
Right.
You know, and what happened? He gave me the instructions. He sends it back to the corner. Bell rings, boom, and what does Harper do? He climbs through the ropes and walks out, goes back to his dressing room. What the heck? Come on. What happened there? Was that a nervous breakdown or what?
Well, that's happened a few times, and I've seen it before. And basically, the problem is, like with Mike Tyson, I saw it once, and I know Mike personally as a friend, but I've been through his whole career. He stared somebody down pretty good when the ref was giving the instructions, and the guy turned around and took off. But Mike had a pretty terrifying stare. He even told me once, and I took care of him many times for fights. He said, I'm not out there to fight. I'm out there to kill him. And I said, Mike. And I've known him since he was an amateur. But he'd say he wanted to put his nose through the back of his head. But when he'd stare at you, and when Joe's done his fights, he was intense.
I've refereed 9 of his fights, and every single one of those fights, he gives a stare down. He beats his opponents down. He didn't put a stare down. Yeah. I remember doing a fight of his with Marvis Frazier, and that was back in New York. And I was giving him the instructions, and my instructions was longer than the fight.
I believe it.
The fight only lasted 30 seconds of the first round. 30 seconds. He came in there, bang, bang, hit him with an uppercut. Marvis goes down. I started the count. I realized he was out. I just stopped it. I stopped the count. There was no reason to continue the 10. Mm-hmm. We went to the doctor to get in there right away. They took him out, and he was okay, but Mike was staring down these guys, and it was unbelievable.
Yeah, he had a couple where he hit him, and it was over very quickly, and Peter McNeely was one that they thought was going to be a good fight, and it was terrible.
Yeah, it was terrible. Now, talking about Mike Tyson, we're talking about people losing control or whatnot. The night he fought Evander Holyfield, and he bit that ear off.
Yes.
He beat the part of the ear off. Yes. You were there at ringside.
Right.
What was going through your head trying to figure out what happened, what's going on here?
Well, he actually bit him twice, and the first time was just a little, I guess you call it a nibble, and the doctor with me said, I don't understand what's happening, because he spit it out, and I said, he bit him.
Yeah.
And I said, you don't see that in the pros. You see that in amateurs, and usually it's in their arm because they wear helmets, and they get under their arm or something, and they'll bite them, and they basically want to get out of there. And then Mike took a pretty good-sized chunk of his ear out, and then that's when Mills Lane was the referee from Reno, stopped the fight, obviously, and one of the doctors who was taking care of him was seeing him, and I picked up the ear and wrapped it in some ice and sent it with the ambulance to sew it back on if they could, and basically it never made it to the hospital.
The ear never made it to the hospital?
No. So, at any rate...
what happened with the ear?
I heard or read whatever that was auctioned off for like $10,000 a year later in New York, but I don't know if that's accurate or not accurate. But any rate, so Mike even to this day has a little gouge there that's missing because it's just a little cartilage back here. But most times when the fighters bite like that, they really, just like we talked about when he broke down or they walk out of the ring, they're trying to get out of the fight, and they may not really know it psychologically openly, but that's what's really happening.
Right now, changing the topic, let's talk a little bit about. There's a new blood test out now.
Yes.
To determine some. A brain injury?
Yeah.
From what I understand, there's like close to 2 million concussions a year from brain injuries. Can you walk us through what's going on with the latest blood test that they have?
Yeah, basically the latest data out from 2017 from the CDC, that's the Centers of Disease Control, the government keeps track of everything. There's 2.8 million people presented to emergency rooms in 2014. That's the last data they have in the United States. 70% of them basically did not have anything, meaning they got checked out, got a CAT scan, etc., and they had a cerebral concussion, but no bleeding, and they were sent home. So the big push is we'd like to be able to test them, see if they have any blood in their head or not, and not have to get a CAT scan of their head, because if they don't, then there's almost never anything on the CAT scan. So you're irradiating the brain for nothing, getting the CAT scan, and you're spending a lot of effort and money on it. The problem with it, the test is put out by a company called Banyan, who I've been talking with all the time. They're in San Diego and in Florida. And it's called the Brain Trauma Index. And basically what it does is you take some blood and you analyze it for an enzyme and a protein from the brain. And if it's positive, it's luminescent, then you know they had a bleed. If it's negative, then you don't have to scan them, because it's just a waste of time and effort and everything else. The problem with it is, from the boxing point of view, is it takes 4 hours to do. They have a little immuno tray. They have 2 little kits that come, and they put it in there, and then you dilute it down to 5, and you do all this other stuff with it. And they're trying to make it so it's an hour, but it's too. We've already looked into it. That's why I'm following along for the commission. It's too slow for, obviously, a fighter. If there's a problem, we're not going to wait 4 hours to get a blood test. Just do the CAT scan and make sure he's okay. But they're trying to make it faster. 2 other companies are working on it now as well. It's been released to the military. I talked to them recently. It has not been released to civilian practice. It was only tested in 6 places in the United States and Europe when it was worked up in ERs. But the Defense Department got it first for the military. That's one of the reasons they were developing it. Like if you're in Afghanistan and you're hurt, they want to know if they got to send you back to Germany to get a CAT scan, or they can just check you. Or if they have to rush and get you out of there. But the Defense Department actually spent $100 million developing it with them. But probably by next year, or the next first quarter of next year, it'll be available for civilians. But like I said, the problem we have with them, we've been following it very closely, because obviously it'd be great, is if it takes that long, it's not really helpful to boxing at this time. If they get it faster, then that'll be a different story.
Now, what in different sports, which is the sports that has the most brain injuries?
Well, it depends who you talk to be honest with you. Obviously, football, or North American football, or whatever you want to call it, has a significant amount of concussions and contusions, and that's part of the sport. And if you look at sports, you can practically pick which sports have more. And some, like tennis, they get hit once because they run into the wall or they hit the pole or something. It's not very common. It's unusual. Mm-hmm. Other sports, you see it all the time, so the trainers and the doctors working with the teams have to be aware of concussions and how they diagnose them, how they treat them, etc. And it's becoming a bigger thing now, because more and more parents don't want their children to be concussed over and over and over, or contused, and then later in life have problems. So it's become a, whatever you call it, hot topic. But we're doing more and more on it and trying to educate people more and more. But even this blood test is not as important as doing a good concussion test to see if they're concussed or not.
Now, we know that Dr. Charlie Bernick here in Las Vegas with the Cleveland Clinic has doing some testing with athlete combat sports. And we know that there's a study to determine where you are when you start as to when you retire. And fighters that have been retired for 10, 15 years are also part of that program. What, continue to get concussions, we getting knocked out or just concussions, whatnot, that has a big effect on you in the long run, doesn't it?
Yes, it can, because basically we don't really know what it does. When we first came out with MRI scans, which show the brain much better than a CAT scan, I was very excited, and I sent a fighter down to the hospital to get one, immediately. And it didn't show anything because he was knocked out. And I sent 2 or 3 more down, and they didn't show anything because they were knocked out. And the knockout punch, as you probably know, doesn't usually show a contusion or anything. But basically, what Charlie's doing at the clinic is we have over 700 fighters enrolled now.
Right.
And so if anybody's listening to your show and they want to get enrolled, even if they're a former fighter, go down there and they'll enroll you. They basically do scans on your blood work, et cetera, neurological examinations, and put you in a data bank, so to speak, at Cleveland Clinic. And they're going to be following them for years and try to figure out if there is some way you could detect or say, like at this point, this guy should stop because
Right.
he's going to end up that way. Currently, obviously, we're just enrolling a bunch of people, but he's doing a good job on it. It's
Yeah, that's
promising.
good. And talking about fighters, concussions and their behavior, pattern changes and whatnot. Now, we know that there was a fight that took place years back. Two Hall of Famers, Roberto Duran against Sugar Ray Leonard, the rematch, the no mas fight known as the no mas, because he said, like, that's it, in the middle of a fight. He wasn't really taking a pounding, but he was just so upset that he couldn't touch Leonard. He just said, like, come on, you going to stand there and fight with me like the way I fight, or you going to be running all night long? And he just quit.
Right.
You were there that night as a ringside doctor. You were with
Yes.
Roberto Duran when you went back to his room,
Right.
in a hotel room. Walk us through that. What happened that night?
Basically, it's similar to any psychological thing, the breakdown or whatever you want to call it. He basically got frustrated, and then he said that that's it, I'm out, and left. And obviously, that was his escape route, just like we talked about some fighters before the fight even starts. He was very upset. There was just him and I, and his mom was in the room, and he was talking in Spanish and all that. And finally,
Was his mom trying to hit him over the head with something?
well,
¿Qué pasó?
Well, she was telling him, and he was telling her, just, shut up, mom, forget it, and all that kind of thing. I don't think he knew I knew Spanish, but anyways, finally, after quite a while, actually, we're going for like a half hour, I told him, like, we got to do the toxicology specimen, or you're not only disqualified, everything will be a real problem for you, which he did. And then, he came back down later, but it was interesting. But it was basically psychological, the same thing.
I mean, fans still to this day talk about that.
Right.
What happened that night? How could he have just walked away? He said he had cramps in his stomach, he had eaten something, and there was all kinds of stories. And
Right.
to this day, I know him, I speak to him. I didn't want to ask him, because I kind of embarrassed even to ask him, because, fighter, you don't quit that way.
Right.
And he did, but, again, things happen. So, mentally, it was just like, oh, wow. But then I remember another incident that happened at Jesus Palace, the fan man. Now, you were there for that.
Yes.
The fan man came in. I wasn't out there. I was watching it on television.
Okay.
And I saw this fan man coming in from one of the buildings on Caesars off the roof with a parachute and a fan on his back. What happened?
Well, he actually flew around a couple times.
Holyfield and Reddick both.
Yep.
The number two.
He is outside. He flew around a couple times because you could hear the fan. And you could, where we were sitting down with the lights, you couldn't see anything. So you looked up. When he actually came in, I looked up and you could see a shadow. And then he went by the lights and hit the ropes. And then the corner guys started hitting him with their old-fashioned
Cell phones?
Cell phones are like blocks or bricks, yeah. and so we had to stop him from hitting him.
They were upset that he interfered with the
he
fight.
interfered, sure did. No question about that.
The fight was stopped for 27 minutes,
yeah,
right?
well, the problem there is obviously you don't know, what he actually damaged or if he hurt somebody or anything else. He hit the top rope, if I recall, and fell over with a fan at that point. But he did it a couple other times at other events, apparently. After that, and then.
He took a real pounding. He got TKO by the fans.
Yes, the fans
at ringside.
They weren't happy, man.
Bang,
It was like,
bang, they were banging him.
And security was trying to stop everybody. It was impossible. So it was a mess, but it was interesting. I mean, you never know. You think you see everything and you don't.
You got to be prepared for the unexpected in boxing, right?
That's right. Oh, for sure.
One time I saw a mother climb into the ring. Her son was getting beat up, and the mother climbed into the ring, took off her shoe with the heel, and started hitting the fighter who was banging her son in the corner. She started hitting him over the head. She TK'd all the fighter. I mean, crazy things happen in boxing.
Amen. It's amazing. It really is, yes.
How do you see the state of boxing today as to when you first started back 25, 30 years ago?
Well, currently, basically, it seems like in America, at least, we like middleweights and heavyweight champions, and we don't have a lot of them at this time, as you know. And just like the Russians are happy with the heavyweights they have now. And people say boxing will go away, et cetera. I don't believe that. It's been around for thousands of years. I do think that MMA is making big progress, and I think that will be a bigger sport because many, many young people do that now. If you look at any of the gyms that have, jiu-jitsu or karate or anything, taekwondo, they'll always put up nowadays MMA to get people to come in. So I think that will be more popular. But again, like, when that started, we wouldn't allow it in Nevada. We banned it. There's no way, and we came up with the rules for it. Finally, we let it in because they were just getting hurt so much.
Yeah, when you cover MMA fights too as ringside doctor.
Yes, yeah.
How do you see that compared to boxing?
The only thing that I think, I mean, it can happen in boxing all the time, but you can have a fight, it's a championship 5-rounder, and they're at the last, little bit of the fight, and the one guy's clearly won, and then all of a sudden something can happen. He puts a choke on him, or he hits him, or whatever, and the other guy wins. So it's a little less predictable. Those of us who've been in boxing for so long, once it's been going through, I keep score myself. You know what the score is and who's going to win and all that before they announce it usually. But in MMA, you never know what's going to happen until it's over, literally.
Yeah, well, I call this schoolyard fighting.
Okay.
I mean, what they do in MMA, we disqualify fighters in boxing.
Oh, for sure.
You know?
Yes.
But, I mean, it's unbelievable how we got a gentleman like Dr. Capanna to explain all these behind the scenes of what goes on in boxing. And we want to thank you so much for being on our show. Fans, we'll catch you guys next week with the Joe Cortez Show. And, of course, you got to watch our show on Fairbook Front. We'll see you next week. Dr. Capanna, thanks a lot.
Sir. Okay, sir.
Take care.
Anytime.
Keep your guards up at all time, guys.
I got to watch him.